He's going to find out, Monica, and when he does, there's nothing I can do to stop him. I know, Mama, I know. Just, please, give me 2 more weeks. I almost have it fixed. 2 weeks. That's what you said back in June. Baby, some things you can't fix by yourself. A bank statement folded twice in my jacket pocket. A set of unsigned divorce papers sitting on the passenger seat of my truck. And my wife's voice, low and scared, coming through a cracked kitchen window on Habersham Street, telling her mother she needed 2 more weeks before I found out. Found out what? I didn't know yet. But I was about to. And so was somebody else in that family. Somebody who'd spent almost a year making sure I never would. My name is Desmond Martin. I'm 44 years old, and for most of my life I believed silence was a kind of strength. That belief nearly cost me my marriage. What I found instead cost somebody else a great deal more. I run Martin Marine Supply out of a warehouse off Bay Street, 3 blocks from the Savannah River, selling rope, winches, and hardware to shrimp boats and pleasure craft alike. My father started the business in 1987 with a folding table and a handshake with every captain working the Isle of Hope docks. I took it over when he passed in 2014, and I built it from a 2-man operation into something with 11 employees and a warehouse that 3 years ago finally turned a real profit. I tell you that because it matters to what comes next. A man who spends his working life reconciling ledgers and catching a half-cent error before his own bookkeeper does, that man does not expect to miss a discrepancy in his own household. Or so I believed. Monica and I met at Savannah State University 20 years ago, back when she was studying elementary education, and I was still working weekends for my father instead of finishing my own degree. She used to say she fell for me because I was the only man in her dorm parking lot who could back a boat trailer without jackknifing it. I fell for her because she memorized every child's birthday in her practicum classroom by the 2nd week of the semester. She teaches 3rd grade now at a public school off Waters Avenue. And every May her classroom smells like a bakery because her students' parents know she never turns down a slice of cake. We married in June of 2009. 16 years this past summer. We built a good, ordinary life, a brick ranch on Wilmington Island 15 minutes from the warehouse. 2 kids, Malik, 14, and Aya, 11, who spent their summers on the dock learning to tie a bowline before they learned to ride a bike without training wheels. I picked Aya up from a friend's house on White Marsh Island that same week in August, and she talked the entire ride home about a science fair project involving oyster shells and water filtration. And I remember thinking, driving down Johnny Mercer Boulevard with the windows cracked, that this was the whole of what I'd built my life around. A daughter who talked with her hands, a son who still let me ruffle his hair in front of his friends, some days, a wife who left a note on the counter most nights I worked late, usually with a small heart drawn under her initial. I didn't know yet that the note I'd find later that week would have nothing underneath it at all. Sunday dinners at Angela Baptiste's house on Habersham Street in the Victorian district had been a fixture of our marriage since before we got married. Cornbread, butter beans, a tablecloth Angela still ironed by hand even though her right hand had trembled a little ever since her stroke the previous spring. I loved that house. I loved the particular comfort of a place where nothing ever seemed to change. Gospel radio humming low from a countertop speaker. A fig tree in the side yard older than I am. Angela's husband, Monica's father, had walked out on the family when Monica was 9 and Terrence was 14, leaving Angela to raise both kids on a school cafeteria supervisor's salary. Monica talked about those years rarely, and always the same way, that her mother never once let either of them see her afraid, even in the months they nearly lost the house on Habersham Street to foreclosure before Angela found a second job cleaning offices downtown on weekends. Terrence, from what I understood, had taken his father's leaving harder and longer. He'd been in and out of steady work his whole adult life, always with a plan that was 6 months from paying off, always the first one at the table for Sunday dinner, and the last one to offer to help clean up after. I hadn't thought much about any of that history until it mattered. Families carry old wounds the way houses carry old wiring, mostly invisible. Until something overloads the circuit and you find out where it was frayed all along. I tell you all of this so you understand. I did not go looking for trouble. Trouble found its way into a manila folder in the bottom drawer of my home office on a Thursday evening in late August, while I was looking for nothing more dramatic than a boat trailer title. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. Thursday, August 21st. I remember the date because it was the same day Martin Marine closed out its best month in 3 years. And I'd planned on telling Monica over dinner. Instead, I never made it to dinner. I got sidetracked in the study looking for a trailer title I intended to hand off to a buyer that weekend, and I went into the bottom drawer of my desk, the one I hadn't opened since tax season, and the title wasn't there. What was there was a bank statement from a credit union 2 counties over. One I didn't recognize, addressed to Monica Martin at a P.O. box I'd never heard of. Balance: $38,400. Account opened the previous September, 11 months earlier. I sat on the edge of that desk a long time with the statement in my hand. Not because $38,400 would break us financially. Martin Marine had a good year. We could absorb a surprise like that without missing a mortgage payment. What broke something in me was simpler and older than money. 16 years, and my wife had an account, a P.O. box, and a story I knew nothing about. I went back through that drawer piece by piece. Underneath the statement was a second stack of paper, and it took me a minute standing there to understand what I was looking at. Not originals, photocopies, each one a withdrawal slip, and none of them belonged to the $38,400 account at all. Every single one was drawn against a different account entirely. One held solely in Angela Baptiste's name, dated roughly 6 weeks apart, stretching back to a date I'd later learn was 9 days after a power of attorney had been signed, the previous August. Monica, it seemed, had been quietly photocopying evidence of money leaving her mother's account for the better part of a year, evidence she'd apparently been collecting rather than acting on. Underneath those, the document itself. A Georgia statutory power of attorney form, dated the previous August, granting someone named Terrence Baptiste, Monica's older brother, authority to manage the financial affairs of Angela Baptiste. I knew Terrence. Everyone in that family knew Terrence, the older brother who'd moved back to Savannah from Jacksonville 2 years earlier after what the family called a rough patch, who showed up to Sunday dinner every 3rd week with a new watch and an old excuse, who'd borrowed money from 3 cousins that I knew of and paid none of it back. I'd never liked him much. I'd never had a reason to think about him past that. I spread everything out across my desk that night after the kids were in bed. The statement, the photocopied slips, the power of attorney, and I did what I do for a living. I built a timeline. The account with the $38,400 balance opened the previous September. The withdrawal slips, once I put them in chronological order, started 9 days after the power of attorney was dated in August, and continued every 6 weeks almost exactly, like clockwork, like someone had built a system designed to stay just below the threshold that would trigger a fraud alert at the bank. Whoever set that pattern understood exactly how closely anyone would be watching, which told me something about how deliberate this was, long before I understood who was actually behind it. I called my friend Kevin Dixon the next morning, an estate and elder law attorney with an office on Drayton Street, someone I'd known since the Chamber of Commerce breakfasts we both used to dread attending. I described the power of attorney over the phone. Was it witnessed or notarized? Kevin wanted to know first. There's a notary stamp on it. I don't recognize the name. Did Angela have any kind of diagnosed cognitive impairment around the time it was signed? Stroke, dementia, anything like that? She had a stroke last April. Kevin was quiet on the line a moment. And this was signed in August, 4 months after. Desmond, I'm not saying anything's wrong yet, but that's a window I'd want to look at closely if it were my family. I hung up the phone and sat in my truck in the warehouse parking lot for 10 minutes before I could make myself go inside and start the workday. That's when the shake finally caught up with my hands. Not from the money. From the shape of what I was starting to see, and the fact that my wife had apparently known enough to start collecting evidence 11 months earlier and never said a single word to me. I want to be honest about what I did next, because it isn't flattering, and a story like this only means something if I tell it straight. I didn't ask Monica about any of it that week. Instead, I did what I've always done when something threatens to knock me off balance. I went quiet, and I went looking for solid ground on my own, without her. I told myself I was protecting her from a conclusion I hadn't fully reached. The truth is, I was protecting myself from a conversation I was afraid to have. That following Monday, I sat across from a divorce attorney named Esther Morgan, in an office on Bull Street looking out over Johnson Square. She had a legal pad open in front of her and hadn't written a word yet. "Walk me through what you found." She folded her hands on the desk. "Don't leave anything out, even the part that doesn't make sense yet." I told her about the account, the withdrawal slips, the P.O. box, the 4 words in a note Monica had left me the week before, "Don't wait up tonight," that I'd barely registered at the time and couldn't stop turning over now. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she set her pen down instead of picking it up. "I'm not going to tell you what this means. I'm a divorce attorney. I only ever see one side of a story, and it's rarely the whole one. Everything you've described could point in more than one direction, and I'd be doing you a disservice if I pretended otherwise. But if you want me to prepare a separation agreement while you figure out the rest, I can have a draft ready by Friday. What would you do, if it were you?" She considered that for a second. I'd want to know what I was protecting myself from before I decided I needed protecting. But I've had clients who waited too long to ask that question and regretted it. There's no clean answer here, Mr. Martin. There's just the one you can live with. Before I left, she asked me one more question, the kind that stuck with me longer than anything else in that meeting. "Have you asked her about any of it? Even one question?" "Not yet." "Why not?" I didn't have a good answer for her, not one I was willing to say out loud in that office. The honest answer was that I was more comfortable building a case in silence than I was sitting across from my wife and risking an answer I couldn't undo hearing. Esther seemed to read some version of that on my face, because she didn't push further. She just made a note on her legal pad and told me the draft would be ready Friday. I told her to go ahead and draft the papers. Not because I'd decided anything, because having them drawn felt, at the time, like the only action available to a man who didn't yet know what question he was supposed to be asking. By Friday afternoon, the papers were sitting on the passenger seat of my truck outside her office. I sat there the better part of an hour before I could make myself drive home, watching the light change off Johnson Square, running the same 4 words through my head over and over. "Don't wait up tonight." I thought about calling Monica right then, from that parking spot on Bull Street, and asking her straight out what the account was for. I picked up my phone twice. Both times I set it back down. I told myself I wanted to see her face when I asked, not hear her voice over a phone line where I couldn't read anything in her expression. That was true as far as it went. It was also, I understood much later, just one more version of the same silence I'd been practicing our whole marriage, waiting for the perfect moment to be honest instead of simply being honest in the moment I had. Angela Baptiste's house sits on Habersham Street in the Victorian district, a 2-story with a wraparound porch and a fig tree in the side yard older than I am. That Sunday, August 31st, the papers were still sitting unsigned in my glove compartment. I carried a sweet potato pie up the porch steps the way I had 100 times before, and let myself in through the side door into the mudroom off the kitchen, the way the whole family always did. The kitchen door was open maybe 6 inches. Old houses carry voices strangely, soft but clear if you're standing in the right spot, which I was, holding a pie I suddenly didn't know what to do with. "He's going to find out, Monica, and when he does, there's nothing I can do to stop him." "I know, Mama, I know. Just please give me 2 more weeks. I almost have it fixed." 2 weeks. That's what you said back in June. "Baby, some things you can't fix by yourself. Keep your voice down." He's right outside on the porch. I stood there in that mudroom with the pie going cold in my hands, and every assumption I'd built over the past 10 days collapsed at once, not because I understood what I was hearing, but because I finally understood I didn't understand anything at all. I set the pie down on the dryer. I walked back out onto the porch, sat down in one of the rocking chairs, and gave myself 30 seconds to decide what kind of man I was going to be for the rest of that dinner. I chose wrong. I said nothing. I ate cornbread and butter beans across a table from my wife and my mother-in-law for 90 more minutes, smiling when Malik told a joke about his algebra teacher, saying nothing about the papers in my glove compartment or the sentence still ringing in my ears. Malik caught up with me on the porch while Monica and Angela were clearing plates. He's 14, old enough now to read a room better than I usually give him credit for. "You good, Dad? You've been weird all night. Just tired. Long week at the warehouse." He looked at me a second longer than the answer deserved, the way his mother does when she knows there's more to something and has decided not to push yet. He let it go with a shrug, and I remember feeling grateful and ashamed in almost equal measure. Grateful that my son trusted me enough not to press, ashamed that I was the reason he had to decide whether to press at all. Aya asked me twice on the drive home if I was feeling all right. I told her I was just tired. That was the first lie I told anyone that week, and it wouldn't be the last one I told myself. It took me 4 more days to do what I should have done from the start. Thursday night, September 4th, after the kids were in bed, I set the bank statement on our kitchen table on Wilmington Island and told Monica I'd found it, the withdrawal slips, the power of attorney, all of it, and that I couldn't sit across a table from her one more time without knowing the truth. She didn't cry right away. She looked almost relieved, the way a person looks when they've carried a weight alone so long that even a hard conversation feels lighter than the silence. She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down before she said anything. "The account isn't mine." She kept her hands flat on the table like she needed something steady under them. "It's my mother's." I opened it to protect what was left of her savings. Protect it from what? From Terrence. Saying his name seemed to cost her something. Last September, I found out he'd been using that power of attorney Mama signed to pull money out of her accounts. Small amounts, spaced out so she wouldn't notice. He told her it was for repairs on her roof, for a hospital copay, for things that never quite added up when I checked. I moved what was left into a new account before he could touch it. That's the $38,000 you found. And the withdrawal slips? Those weren't from that account. No, those are copies I've been keeping. Every time I noticed a new withdrawal from her original account, I'd go to the branch and request a copy of the slip. I told myself I was building a case. I just never had the nerve to actually bring it to anyone. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" "Because I know you, Desmond." Her voice cracked on that. "I knew if I told you, you'd want to go straight to the police, straight to a lawyer, and I was terrified of what that would do to my mother. He's still her son. He still lives in that house half the time. I needed to find a way to fix this that didn't blow up what's left of my family before I understood how bad it really was. You've been carrying this alone for a year. I've been carrying a lot of things alone for a lot longer than a year." She looked at me straight on when she said it. "So have you." That's kind of the problem, isn't it? I sat with that a long moment. She wasn't wrong, and I knew it even as it stung to hear. "What did you mean 2 more weeks? What were you trying to fix?" "I found records 3 weeks ago showing he'd opened a second account in Mama's name that I didn't even know existed. A CD she'd forgotten about from years back. He'd been draining that one too, this whole time, more than the one I'd been watching. I was trying to get proof together on that one before I brought any of it to you, because I wanted to hand you the whole truth at once, not pieces of it." She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. "I should have just told you from the start. I know that now. I should have asked you from the start. Instead, I hired a divorce attorney." Her face went still. "You did what?" I told her about the papers sitting in my glove compartment for 10 days. I watched something in her expression break and then slowly settle into something steadier. Not forgiveness yet, just the beginning of it. We sat at that table until nearly 2 in the morning. Somewhere past midnight she got up, poured 2 glasses of water, and set one in front of me without asking if I wanted it. The way you do for someone you've decided you're still building a life with. We built our whole marriage on both of us thinking silence was protection. She sat back down across from me. "Maybe it's time we stopped." The next morning, before either of us left for work, she showed me the second folder. The one with the CD records and 3 weeks of research she'd been doing quietly on her lunch breaks, trying to understand exactly how much her brother had taken and how to prove it without dragging her mother through something that would break her. She stood at the kitchen counter with her coffee going cold. "I don't want to destroy him. I just want it to stop, and I want Mama to be safe. I don't even know what that looks like anymore. It looks like calling somebody who knows how to do this the right way. You don't have to carry this by yourself anymore. Neither of us does. I called Kevin Dixon again that Friday morning, September 5th, and this time I told him the whole truth instead of half of it. Bring me the original power of attorney, every withdrawal slip you found, and Monica's records on that second account, Kevin said. If this is what it sounds like, we're not talking about a family disagreement anymore. 3 weeks of digging followed. Kevin pulled the power of attorney filing from the Chatham County Clerk of Superior Court and drove out to meet with the notary listed on the document, a woman named Dolores Fenn, who ran a small tax prep office off Waters Avenue. He called me from her parking lot afterward, and I could hear traffic on Waters Avenue behind his voice. She had no memory of ever meeting Angela Baptiste, and when I asked to see her notary journal, Georgia requires every notary to log the date, the document type, and the signer's identity for every notarization they perform. There was no entry for your mother-in-law. Not that week, not that month, not ever. So the stamp was forged. The stamp itself is real. It's hers. Kevin's voice had the flat, careful tone he used for things he wanted me to hear clearly the first time. She told me it went missing from her office about 10 months before this document was signed, during a stretch when your brother-in-law was dating her part-time receptionist. She reported it stolen to her insurance carrier at the time, filled out the paperwork, even followed up twice. Nothing ever came of it, because a missing stamp with no fraud attached to it yet isn't a police matter, it's a nuisance claim. Until now, it just sat in a file. Now it's the center of one. I asked him what it would take to prove the connection between the missing stamp and the document itself, beyond the notary's own testimony that she'd never met Angela. Kevin leaned back in his chair. 2 things help us. First, the timeline. The stamp disappeared in June. The document was notarized in August, and Terrence was still seeing that receptionist through July. That's not proof by itself, but it's the kind of thing a prosecutor likes to lay out for a jury. Second, and more importantly, her actual notary journal has 0 entries for the 6 weeks surrounding the date on this document. A working notary logs everything, because the journal is what protects her if a signature is ever questioned. An empty page where a signature should be tells its own story. So somebody used her real stamp on a document she never actually notarized. That's forgery in the first degree under Georgia law. Desmond, not a technicality. A felony. The following week, I sat in Kevin's office on Drayton Street with a forensic accountant he'd brought in, a soft-spoken woman named Amanda Powell, who spread 3 spreadsheets across the conference table like a hand of cards. She slid one page toward me, a column of dates and amounts running down the left margin. Once I had access to both accounts, plus the CD your wife found. The pattern was easy to follow. $61,000 give or take, moved out over the past 13 months. Some of it traces to a bookmaker in Jacksonville, some to a used truck he bought and quietly sold 2 months later for cash. None of it to home repairs, none to hospital bills, nothing that matches a single explanation he ever gave your mother-in-law. How confident are you in that number? Very. Bank records don't lie about where money goes, even when people do. She tapped a highlighted row near the bottom of the page. The only piece I can't fully trace is about $4,000 in cash withdrawals, with no clear destination. Could be gambling debts paid in person, could be something else entirely. Everything above that line, I can walk a judge through dollar by dollar. What happens now? I looked at Kevin. Now we file a petition with Chatham County Probate Court to void the power of attorney on the grounds of forgery and your mother-in-law's documented incapacity at the time of signing. He tapped a folder at his elbow. Her neurologist has already confirmed short-term memory deficits that persisted through the fall of last year, well past the date this document was signed. And I'm referring the whole matter to Georgia's Adult Protective Services Division, because Angela is a vulnerable adult whose finances were controlled without valid legal authority for over a year. Terrence didn't know any of it was coming until an APS caseworker and a probate court notice reached Angela's house on the same day, Thursday, September 25th, 3 weeks to the day after the night I finally learned the truth at my own kitchen table. I wasn't in that room when it happened, and I won't pretend I was. Monica called me from her car outside her mother's house that evening, still shaking. The caseworker was so kind to Mama. Monica's voice was still unsteady. She sat with her almost 2 hours, went through everything slow, made sure she understood none of this was her fault. Terrence tried to explain it the same way he always has. Repairs, hospital bills, a favor for a friend he never got repaid for. The caseworker just kept asking him for receipts. He didn't have a single one. How's your mother doing? Angry, embarrassed, relieved, I think, underneath all of it, even though she won't say that part out loud yet. Monica paused long enough that I could hear her take a breath. The caseworker told her something before she left that I keep thinking about. She said the hardest part of her job isn't finding the fraud. It's convincing families that reporting it isn't a betrayal. Mama asked her outright if this made her a bad mother for not seeing it sooner. The caseworker told her the people who do this to family members are specifically counting on nobody wanting to look too closely. That it's not carelessness, it's exploitation, dressed up as trust. What did your mother say to that? Nothing. For a long time. Then she asked for a second cup of coffee and said she wanted to see everything, every document, start to finish. I think that's the moment she stopped being someone this happened to and started being someone doing something about it. Terrence called me himself that same evening. I almost didn't answer. You put the law on me over some misunderstanding. His voice was tight, clipped. Family doesn't do that to family. Family doesn't forge a notary's stamp to steal from their own mother, either. I kept my voice level. I didn't put anything on you, Terrence. You did that yourself 13 months ago. She's my mother. That money was going to be mine eventually anyway. It wasn't yours yet. And a woman recovering from a stroke, 4 months out, signing a document she doesn't remember signing, that's not an inheritance. Ask a judge what that is. You don't know what it's like. His voice dropped, less angry now than tired. Watching your sister marry into a good life while I was still catching up on rent. Watching everybody at that table treat you like the son-in-law who finally did something with himself, while I'm the one everybody's disappointed in every single Sunday. That's not a reason, Terrence. That's just the story you told yourself to make the reason sound smaller than it was. He didn't answer that. I heard him breathing on the other end of the line for a few seconds before the call ended. He hung up on me. I haven't spoken to him since, outside of a courtroom hallway. The probate court voided the power of attorney in November, citing both the forged notarization and Angela's documented incapacity at signing. The Chatham County District Attorney's Office charged Terrence with forgery in the first degree and theft by conversion the following month, built on Amanda Powell's forensic tracing and Dolores Fenn's sworn statement that she'd never notarized a single document for Angela Baptiste in her life. The week before the plea hearing, Kevin asked Angela if she wanted to prepare a statement for the court. She sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad for 3 evenings, Monica beside her most nights, crossing out more than she kept. She set her pen down halfway through the second evening, looking more tired than frustrated. I don't know how to say this without sounding like I'm asking for pity. I don't want pity. I want him to understand what he actually did, in words that aren't dressed up. Say it exactly the way you just said it to us, Monica told her. That's the version that matters. Angela read parts of it out loud to me the following Sunday, sitting on that same porch where I'd once given myself 30 seconds to decide what kind of man I was going to be. He didn't just take money, she read. He took the thing that let me sleep at night. Believing my children would tell me the truth, even the hard truth, especially the hard truth. I want that back more than I want the $61,000, and I don't know which court is supposed to give it to me. I told her I thought that last line belonged in front of the judge exactly as written. She used it, word for word, the day of the plea. I sat behind Angela in the courtroom the day Terrence entered his plea in January. She held my hand through most of it, her grip tighter than I expected from a woman her age. He pled to a reduced charge, one that still carried full restitution and 5 years of supervised probation. The court ordered the entire $61,000 repaid to Angela on a structured schedule, garnished directly from his wages once he found steady work again. Before the judge accepted the plea, Angela asked to speak. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. I raised that boy myself, mostly alone, after his father left. She didn't look at Terrence when she said it. I forgave him plenty of things over the years because that's what a mother does. But forgiving somebody and letting them keep taking from you are two different things, and I finally understand the difference. I want my money back, and I want him to understand this was real. Afterward, in the hallway outside the courtroom, Terrence approached us. Monica stepped half in front of her mother without seeming to think about it. "Mama, I'm sorry." He couldn't quite look at either of us directly. "I never meant for it to get this far." "You meant for it not to get caught," Angela said. "That's different from not meaning for it to happen. I love you. I will always love you. But I'm not confused about the difference anymore between those two things, and I need you to understand I'm not going to be confused about it again." He didn't have anything to say back to that. He left the courthouse alone, and none of us walked him out. Angela took it hard in the weeks after, the way you'd expect a mother to take watching her son stand in front of a judge. She stopped attending her weekly card game for almost a month, and Monica drove over most evenings just to sit with her so the house wouldn't feel as empty as it had started to feel. But she told me something at Sunday dinner in April, 3 months after everything was finally settled, that I think about more than almost anything else from that whole year. I spent 13 months scared of what would happen if the truth came out. She passed the cornbread down the table like it was any other Sunday. Turns out I should have spent that time scared of what would keep happening if it didn't. Monica and I started seeing a counselor that October, not because our marriage was broken, but because I finally understood that the habit which nearly ended it wasn't hers. It was mine. 16 years of believing that carrying weight silently was the same thing as protecting the people I loved. It wasn't. It was just a slower, quieter way of shutting them out. In one of our early sessions, our counselor, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Kelly with an office on Abercorn Street, asked us both the same question. What did silence cost each of you this year? Specifically, not in general. Specifically, Monica answered first. It cost me 11 months of feeling like I was drowning alone in my own kitchen. It almost cost me my marriage, because I was so afraid of what honesty would do that I let a lie sit between us instead. I thought about it longer than I wanted to admit out loud. It cost me 10 days I can't get back, sitting on information instead of asking one direct question. It almost cost me a wife who was trying to protect her mother the whole time I was busy assuming the worst about her. And what did honesty cost you? In the end. Once you finally tried it. Monica reached over and took my hand before either of us answered. Neither of us needed to say the number was smaller than we'd feared. It cost me an uncomfortable Thursday night, I finally said. One conversation I'd been avoiding for 10 days that turned out to be nowhere near as bad as the 10 days of avoiding it. "Doctor," Kelly made a note, then looked back up at both of us. "That's the pattern I want you two to remember, going forward. Not the specifics of this year. The shape of it. Fear of a conversation is almost always worse than the conversation itself. The two of you spent a combined 13 months managing a crisis separately that took less than a night to resolve together, once you finally sat down at the same table. How do we make sure we don't do that again?" Monica asked him. "You won't do it perfectly. Nobody does." He set his pen down. "But you build a habit, a standing rule if you want to call it that. The next time either of you catches yourself sitting on something because you're afraid of what it might mean, that's the signal to bring it to the other person that same week, not the same year. Practice makes the habit smaller each time you use it. We've tried to hold to that since. Some weeks we do better than others, but it's a rule now. In our house, in a way it wasn't before that October. I never signed those separation papers. I drove them back to Esther Morgan's office myself in late September and asked her to close the file instead. I still keep a copy in a drawer at the warehouse, not as a souvenir, but as a reminder of exactly how close silence came to costing me something I could never have gotten back. The account Monica opened to protect her mother's savings still exists. It isn't a secret anymore. It carries all three of our names now. Mine, Monica's, and Angela's, and every Sunday dinner since. Before anyone touches the cornbread, Angela says roughly the same thing over that table, that the truth spoken out loud, frightening as it is, costs a family far less than the truth kept quiet ever will. I think about that mudroom often. The 6 inches of an open kitchen door, a pie going cold in my hands, 30 seconds on a porch that I spent making the wrong choice. I don't get to go back and choose differently. None of us do. What I get instead is every Sunday since, a table with room for one more chair, and a family that finally stopped mistaking silence for safety. If there's a secret sitting in your own house tonight, a debt, a fear, a folder in the bottom drawer you've been meaning to explain, don't wait for someone to find it by accident the way I did. Put it on the table yourself, before the silence does the deciding for you. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more family-centered accounts like this.